Senzeni na Tina Senzeni na Tina Senzeni na
Sure, there's a lot to unpack in our conversation today, and I think the first step for me is to maybe give a story. So my life has been radically changed by my experience in Fees Must Fall. I was in a black body, I still am in a black body, but I mean, before Fees Must Fall, I knew I was black, I was in a black body, I was living some of the consequences of blackness. But I think it was truly within Fees Must Fall that the state, albeit a state with a black emperor at the head of the table, the state gave us a very clear message about its perspective, its recognition, its intention about the black body. And this, for me, landed very clearly when, and this happened at Stellenbosch, where I was, but it happened at UCT, it happened at Wits, most campuses. When black students would be protesting, there would be a bit of a scurry, and a scuffle, and the police would arrive. And during Fees Must Fall, what we did was to use the few white allies that we had as physical human shields to protect us from the police shooting at us. The reason we could do this was because policemen don't want to shoot white people. And if there was ever a clearer message about whose body deserves, does not deserve, should or should not be violated or violation, that for me was a moment where it was like, oh, okay, we see you, we hear you. And I think that, you know, as we have this conversation, it's important for me to situate this conversation about black bodies in that context. In a context of using other white people who are allies, who were there in jail, really, not because there was like a material need for them no, but let's be real, broadly speaking, to participate in Fees Must Fall, but they were there as allies, people who were supporting, you know, social movements, wanting to see redress, They were there, and we had to find a use for them, which a lot of times was human shielding, because that's where, that was where the state would not cross the line on violence, right? So of course, I mean, there were a few white guys that were punched at Parliament. That happened, and I think there's a different context and conversation about that, but broadly, that was our reality. And so, where I want to perhaps start my differing with what you've said is not to say that there is a place for black bodies, which is below white bodies, but to state that the black body is a place, right? And it is a place where we justify, we permit, we allow, we ignore certain forms of violence and dehumanization. And this is precisely because the black body is not considered to carry any form of personhood. And so I think that it's important for us then, if we're going to go down this line of objectifying the black body, which is actually what we're doing by talking about the black body as a site of oppression, if we're going to go down that line, then I think we should name it not as the black body has a place, it is a place upon which certain acts can be visited. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to say, and still connected to this conversation about the police in South Africa, so I'm very concerned that currently our discourses about race, around racial justice, economic justice, gender justice in South Africa is borrowing a lot from the US context, right? And obviously US cultural hegemony, so you know everything they do comes here. But I think it's really, really important for us as South Africans to practice, I want to say, take our brains to the gym, actually. Like we really, really need to practice interrogating our own complexities. Because what comes out from the US, it's valid to a point, and then it doesn't make sense anymore, because we are a black majority country. So the ways in which racism, in which white supremacy and white fragility and white fears manifest in our context are similar, but very much not the same for what is happening in our country. And so I want to go into this question of what happens when a row of black policemen is stopped from attacking black children by a row of white bodies. What is behind that phenomenon, right? And I think for me, what it comes down to is not only the fact that black personhood does not exist in the context of our state, but also the fact that we've internalized the fact that we are not persons, to the extent that we don't bat an eyelid when we've got to visit violence upon each other. And I think that's another level of the conversation that we have. I want us to leave white people for a bit. Like, not leave them, but leave them for a bit. And let's talk about what is happening within us, that the only thing that stops us from attacking each other is whiteness, if such a idea could exist. And I think we've got to think very carefully then about what this means, because, and not to take away from the importance of talking about the body and trauma, but I think that if we only situate this conversation in a conversation about feelings, what we see and what we feel, right? Then we don't give ourselves the space to actually interrogate what racialized state violence is, what it looks like, and how it manifests. Because it's not just about feelings, it's not just about the psyche, right? There are structural realities that we need to interrogate, which actually inform what is possible for the psyche to think, to process, to experience. And I think we've got to shift the conversation in that sense. So that's for me quite an important thing we really need to think about. And then to also recognize that, so if we think about the definition of the state, which is, the entity, the institution that has a monopoly on the tools of violence, right? Monopoly on violence. And we think about what the state then does by taking black bodies, broadly speaking, the police force, taking black bodies and making them the agents that are going to carry out this monopoly on violence. What we're seeing then, to answer your question, Eusebius, is that after 1994, the state in and of itself did not change, right? The actors, the agents of the state might have changed, but the way in which the state sought to exist, to protect itself, to further itself, to expand itself, did not change. Apartheid at its best, like the best version of apartheid, was corruption. It was taking from many to give to a few, right? It was theft. If we want to be nice about apartheid, we can say it was corruption, it was theft. 25 years later, the institutions of the state are still set up to take from the many and look after the few, right? But now it's different bodies doing it, because those same bodies have internalized a recognition that the black body carries nothing, that it doesn't carry any value. And so when we analyze, our perspectives around whiteness and white supremacy and what that means in government, etc., we've got to be honest about the fact that even Cyril there himself, he's sitting with something. He's traumatized, right? All of those the whole parliament, they need proper therapy. They need to undo certain things, because they are sitting with inherent anti-blackness in themselves. They hate themselves, which is why they can hate us. The last thing that I want to say before I hand over is, I think, I had an argument/debate with a friend of mine in the audience about this, but I was pulled over to the other side, so I'm quite convinced. And I think that this is something I want to situate not as an either or, but as a and but. So I think that the danger in intellectualizing the black body is that we leave that body nameless. It's a body. We never talk about white people as bodies in intellectual discourse. We seldom do, unless, of course, we're going into the specificities of police violence or this or that or that. But generally, we don't objectify white people as bodies in most of our intellectual discourse. And so the danger for me of intellectualizing the black body is that we take it away or we separate it from personhood. That very act actually reinforces, right, the structures of power that separate it from personhood. So then the black body does not have a name, does not have a face, does not have memories, does not have experiences, because it's a body, right? That's what we do with it. And so I think it's very important for us that when we're intellectualizing the black body, that we name it as black people, bodies that carry life and experiences and, that we name it as black people. And I think it's important for us as black people to do that in our own discourse about ourselves, because it's an act of reclaiming. But I think broadly it's to say that we want to shift ourselves out of this objectification, this victimization, because, you know, trauma and victimhood can only take us so far, right? It can only take us so far in the conversation. We've got to shift our conversations out of, and this is coming from an article of Robin Kelly, who critiqued Ta-Nehisi's work, actually. We've got to shift ourselves out of this cultivation of sympathy, right? I'm traumatized sympathy. And please, and hear me, I'm not dismissing the valid trauma and the pain that we carry. But I'm saying that we've got to shift out of this cultivation of sympathy and actually look at what does the creation then of social justice mean for a world in which a black person can exist and can live and can experience all the things that we assign to personhood. We've got to really interrogate what it means for us to interiorize our pain, make it interior, put it inside, as opposed to situating our pain in the public sphere. That is essentially, for me, one of the huge differences between the emotions of white people and people of color, right? It's where it's situated in the public sphere versus the private sphere, and the consequences, right, of those feelings and of those experiences.
Nina.